Welcome to Innovation and Leadership. I'm Jess Larson. On this episode, we're lucky enough to have Ross Levinsohn. Ross, thanks for doing this.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, Jess.
So why don't I start off with a few interesting positions you've had over your career, and then will you bring up the high points that I missed? Is that okay?
Sure, you bet.
Okay. Director at HBO, VP of Programming, CBS Sportsline, GM at Alta Vista, President at Fox Interactive over MySpace, interim CEO at Yahoo, CEO of Guggenheim Digital that invested and run Hollywood Reporter, Billboard Magazine, Adweek, Clio, a bunch of others. Senior advisor at BCG, CEO at Tribune Interactive, so Chicago Tribune, New York Daily News, Orlando Sentinel, Baltimore Sun, and others. CEO at LA Times, chairman and CEO at the Arena Group, and I believe most recently running Sports Illustrated. How did I do?
Well, gosh, I must be old because that's a long list. But yes, that's pretty darn good. So Sports Illustrated was part of the Arena Group, but yes, I had the fortunate opportunity to run it as part of the Arena Group before taking over the Arena Group. So yeah, it's been quite a ride for a small town New Jersey kid.
It's a space that's evolving so much. I would love to start off with, having held positions at some of the most famous media brands in the world, how you see the next handful of years and what changes you think are on the way for the industry.
Yeah, I think we're in probably the most transformative time that I can remember in my career, with maybe the exception of the emergence of the internet as a whole. There have been, I think, incremental changes in the media space over the years. If you go all the way back to the town crier, right, would stand in the town square and yell the news or the information to people. That evolved obviously into newspapers, which, begat radio, which begat television, which begat, color television, and then cable television, and then satellite television. And look where we are today, where you couldn't even imagine when I was a child of a thing called a cell phone, but that you could watch, high quality HD television or video from anywhere in the world on a device the size of your palm. I guess what's next is we'll be embedding those chips in brains, and that will transmit right into your eyeball, and you won't even need a screen. You'll just be watching. Well, I guess Apple with their new goggles is sort of doing that for us. But today is really like nothing I've ever seen before, in the sense that, certainly generative AI is impacting every walk of life as we know it. In some cases, we're going to see advances in medicine and health and healthcare that will change the world. There's certainly a downside to things that are coming where, the idea of certainly a conventional war as we've known it is over. And that's scary. Not that the war in itself is incredibly scary, but the fact that, the way things are evolving, we can't even imagine. But in the media space, we're seeing that, there's always been, certainly in my career, there's always been a next thing that has been the bridge and capital infusion thing for media companies. The thing that just replaced the old thing. And we've sort of hit this place in streaming. And I don't know what the next thing is, but streaming has become the thing. And that thing is not replacing on a positive cash flow basis the old thing. And it's the first time in the history of media business that that's happened. So what I grew up on was something, there was a great book. I think it was written by Marshall McLuhan. I may be wrong on that, but I think it was Marshall McLuhan, called The Gatekeepers. I'll have to double check that. But The Gatekeepers was about the 3 or 4 companies in the United States that controlled everything we saw. I'm old enough to remember Walter Cronkite, who delivered the most trusted man in news. Those days are over. There are no more gatekeepers that most Americans believe, which is a sort of sad commentary to where we are, and the advancement of AI and the advancement of deep fakes makes it so that you and I could actually be having this conversation, but it's not you or I, right? And so as a consumer, How do you navigate that? Well, what's happening, in my opinion, and I'm seeing it every day, is that what used to be one to many has become many to many. So you, Jess, have a following that's large, and you don't need CBS TV or the New York Times to deliver information to me. In fact, I trust you. Like, I trust that you're going to deliver the real deal to me as a consumer. And that's an exciting part, but guess what? It disintermediates the media companies. So those people who have controlled everything for decades and decades have sort of lost that power. And we can go further into that, but you asked me a very simple question. I have always loved these times. I love the value of the brands that I've grown up with. One of the beauties of Sports Illustrated was that I read it every day, every week that I got it in my mailbox on a Thursday as a kid. I couldn't wait for it, and to have the honor to sort of have a part in that was a pretty cool thing. But that needed to change too. So I embrace the transformative moments. It's scary for a lot of people. I could tell you story after story about the folks who didn't want change that I worked with, and I understand why now as maybe the senior person in the room in many cases. So, but I still love it. I love change, and I love being a part of it.
It's tough, right? Like this mindset of people who, man, things were good just as they are, right? And like you can understand why they want to hold on to what they've got, right? Or
Oh, 100%.
scraping the walls to try and keep it there, right? The only problem is the rest of the world isn't cooperating. And then also spending time with the people who have decided, no, I'm going to be a part of inventing the future can kind of be inspirational too, right?
They're both true. I understand the former a lot better today than I did 25 years ago. I tell you a funny story. I was at Fox News Corp, and was the guy pushing the digital agenda for a bit. And I sat down with a very senior executive there who, at lunch, had been given the order by the boss, support this internet thing. And he really didn't want to. And he was towards the end of his career, and we were having lunch in New York City. And he said, well, the boss wants me to help you, and I guess I'll throw you some money. Just stay the hell out of my way. Like, I got 2 years to retirement. I don't want to deal with this thing, and just, I'll help you, but I don't want you to bother me. And as a young brash kid, I was like, well, are you crazy? Like, this is the most exciting moment in the history of the world. But I get it. You got 2 years left to retirement, and your life has been pretty darn good, and things are changing, and that's scary. And you just want to do your job and go home. And I've seen that story 100 times, since. I never quite understood it in the way I do now. And I only understand it now from the perspective of it's scary. And I hear young kids talk in language that I don't understand. I'm leaning in and I feel like the dumbest guy in the room, but I learn a lot from them. And, I have a 16-year-old boy who's way more advanced than I am. I was certainly at 16, but knows things about the world that I want to pay attention to. So again, it's kind of fun. It keeps you young.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. My business hero is Warren Buffett, and love Charlie Munger. And, you look at Warren in his 90s, and, Charlie made it, a few months short of 100, right? And they talked about how much they love senior leaders. And he said, like, it's really hard to teach a new dog old tricks. And I think about some lessons from from 20 years ago. And you hear about like folks coming out of Silicon Valley, inventing internet businesses and stuff, and just not able to secure marketing dollars because they didn't know how to talk to Madison Avenue. And, I remember one great story, and I'm going to hesitate on which brand it was because I'm not sure. They hired someone very, very senior out of Madison Avenue to come onto the team. And I don't know if this was Google, Yahoo, I can't remember who it was, but they went back And it wasn't like, 24-year-old kids going to meet with these, senior executives in their 50s, right? It was a senior executive in their 50s who spoke their language, who could translate internet into how they thought. And all of a sudden it went from being a hobby to, multi-billion dollar company, which is an
Yeah.
oversimplified version. But you look at this idea of like, yeah, there's lots of smart people inventing AI this and knew that. Um, but there can be a bit of a language barrier, being that the money they want from customers are people probably from their parents' generation, right?
Yeah, I think that's a great illustration of some of the challenges and the most successful folks that I know in who have bridged the gap between those two worlds, and they're very different worlds. Have been open uh, to the idea of embracing it, and if they don't know something, they bring somebody in who does. Probably the best example I have in my career is Rupert Murdoch. I worked within News Corp for 7 years, almost 7 years, and got some amazing time with him in the last couple through his curiosity and just watching him interact with people generations younger or a generation younger, decades younger, and be curious. It was a great lesson to watch that here's a man who, arguably one of the leaders in the history of the media business, did more to transform parts of it than anybody. And he would say to me, why don't you put together a dinner? I'm coming to Los Angeles, put together a dinner with some interesting people. And I'd watch him sit there for hours and ask all the questions. And these were a lot of these people were leaders of Silicon Valley. He was so curious to learn. And when I would get private time with him um, and ask him about that, he said, I always want to be learning and I always am curious. And, I'm open to hearing other ideas. And boy, oh boy, if that guy can say that, then for me, that was as good a lesson as I could have. That a man who has accomplished as much as anyone in the history of a business would be open to listening to somebody 50 years his junior. That tells you a lot.
I've never met him, but I'm really happy you brought up that example. It's actually been an interesting observation running the show of having, you know, entrepreneurs whose businesses are at the tens of millions, the hundreds of millions, the billions, and then the tens of billions. And yeah, actually, recently into the hundreds of billions was right. And I think about especially like the founders, like the guys who started and the gals who started the $10 million company versus the $100 million company versus the multi-billion-dollar company. And like I my observations line up really with your experience there of like the the bigger the business that somebody founded, the more likely I observe like humble listening, humble observation, and then like going off and thinking hard on their own to connect dots of like what they didn't hear. And it's not telling. Like they were smart people, and eventually when they came up with all these conclusions, like they did a lot of direction, right? But it's like the smaller the business, the more likely the CEOs to like be the one telling everybody how everything is. And it's like the bigger they were, the more likely they were to, like you said, to like be listening and to be curious instead of overconfident that they have all the answers. So that's, anyways, I love that story.
Yeah, I've seen it all in that respect. In that, I've worked in startups before, and I've worked for multinational, multi-billion-dollar companies, and even as a CEO of, on one end of the spectrum, I was CEO for Yahoo for a bit, and that was a multi-continent, multi-billion-dollar business, and I just had been running the Arena Group, which was 500 people, $250 million of revenue, no comparison to the two businesses to a degree, in terms of size and scale. Way harder to run the smaller one than the bigger one. Way harder. I mean, Yahoo at our level was control. It was a lot of time because we had a lot of people, but it was actually easier overall to run than a smaller company, that was fully virtual because of COVID. And I love both of them equally, but very, very different experiences. The other thing is, if not every entrepreneur can scale to run a multinational company, and certainly very few multinational CEOs could be entrepreneurs. And that's okay, actually. It's okay. It's a different skill set. I've only met maybe a handful of people who've been able to do both. The ones that come, or the two that come to mind are obviously Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk, who have been incredibly successful. Maybe Jack Dorsey to a degree, who have been successful doing both.
Yeah, you, I gotta I gotta take this entrepreneurship class at Stanford, and I remember a professor saying, um, the mindset and the skill set to deal with so much uncertainty and to like charge into the darkness as the founder
Yeah,
and like this jack of all trade and all these things. Um, Very often that personality type is not the one who is good at sitting behind a desk and administrating and like uh like it's a, like you said, like a lot of times it's like a completely different personality, different interest group, different mindset, right? Like you look at how rare a Jeff Bezos is in comparison, right?
I left
And
him out. I apologize. Boy,
I'll make sure to
forget
tell him
him.
personally. We can text
He's
him.
done a pretty good job of running a startup to a global, leader.
Yeah, but I like what you said about that. That's okay.
Yeah,
Like you think about in the last decade or two, entrepreneurship has really been lauded. And, I don't know, when I was a kid in the 80s and 90s, like being an entrepreneur wasn't this like super cool thing. It's like some people did it, but it wasn't like the way the press has talked about it in the last 15 years, right? And now I think you have a lot of kids wanting to be an entrepreneur that like maybe haven't taken like the internal inventory of like, is this really, is like, am I really cut out for this? Like, is this what I was born to do? You know?
let me give you a sports analogy, okay? Because I've
Yeah.
spent a lot of time in sports. I'll use baseball as the example. There's a thing in baseball called a five-tool player. If you're a five-tool player, you can do it all. You can run, you can hit for power, you can steal bases, you can field. Those are rare. It's really rare to find. Willie Mays was a five-tool player, right? He could do it all. Um, but if you're really good at playing defense, you can make a great living. You don't have to hit 300, but if you're a Gold Glove shortstop, team needs that too, or a great catcher. Uh, if you hit home runs for a living, strike out a lot, can't field, can't run, but you hit 40 or 50 home runs a year, you make a great living. It's sort of true in the world we live in. Like there are very few five-tool CEOs. Mark Zuckerberg is a five-tool. Jeff Bezos obviously can do it all. Elon Musk can do it all. But
But
there
look
are
at Richard Branson, right?
Richard
He can
Branson. I mean, but
he can
there,
start he can start 500 companies. 300 of them are still in business, but he doesn't run those companies. Do you know what I mean? Like he's
and
not the
by the way,
CEO of these companies.
here's what I'd say. He sits in that power very comfortably, right? And which is, you've met a lot of very successful people. They in many cases they all have the same quality, which is they're very hands-on and very controlling in everything. And it takes almost that next level to be able to let go and empower others to do that. And I truly don't know how you can run a giant company without doing that. And certainly I haven't been anywhere close to as successful as any of those people. And you can only do what you can do. But I think those people who can sit in their own power and embrace that ethos probably are happier and do better than anybody else.
Yeah. Well, I'm fascinated with the media and the media business and entertainment, and so I definitely have more questions here. And like actually, podcast yesterday, we had a producer on the show, Justin Persh, who he was a production executive over E1 and did, $200 million Dungeons and Dragons with Chris Pine recently. And, he started like the $5 to $7 million Jean-Claude Van Damme movie shot in Serbia, right? And then just over the years worked all the way up. And he said, it's a big time in entertainment as well, where, as these streaming numbers have been published, it's officially come out that they spent more to make the content than they were making they're making up for it in stock price, not in revenue, right? And that's not a sustainable long-term game,
Yeah.
right? And so you look at, that unsustainability for how streaming is and the big changes in the media. It does seem like there'll be some opportunities for new media entrepreneurs. While I've got you, I'm gonna ask for some free advice. We're getting very into some venture capital stuff in the longevity biotech space. And so kind of because of the success of doing these podcasts and then these parties where I get a bunch of high profile people at the podcast to come together and meet each other. And, it's a sponsored dinner they don't have to pay to come to, right? It's like been an incredible opportunity. And so we're thinking like, wow, we got to do this for longevity. Like we should be putting together like the watering hole for longevity and investing and like try to become the top source that has the best numbers on what's going on with the math. One of our clients was the team that got bought out by Bloomberg because they had the new energy finance. They had the best numbers on what was going on with renewable energy deals and investing in the news. And they were just like the most current. So Bloomberg bought them. So it could become, instead of NEF, it was BNEF, right? And so thinking about like startup in this space, what advice would you have for us going after something like that?
Don't be penny wise and pound foolish.
Okay.
I hear this all the time. If you really are building a big idea, worry less about dilution and more about capturing market share.
Mm.
And I think entrepreneurs are generally focused on dilution. They want to keep as much of the company as they can versus the size of the market and the opportunity. So if you're talking about health and wellness, sustainability, lifespans, I mean, that's infinity to me, right? So if I could raise, I've seen this so many times, I could have raised 50 million, but I raised 10 and then I ran out of money and, business shut down. I always say, if you can raise money, raise it whenever you can to be able to build your dream. The second part of that will take care of itself. If you build something that's viable and large enough, right? And so I know a bunch of entrepreneurs who have a very clear pattern in things. They build small companies, they raise very little money, they sell it for $20 or $30 million, but they own 70% of it, and they do great every time, right? And not every time because you can't make everything work, but that seems to be. That's like hitting doubles, not home runs. And most of investing is about hitting home runs and 5Xs and 10Xs, right? And those are really hard to do. But my only point to your question was raise the money you need to be successful. Don't raise the money to protect your stake in it. Because if you do well, your stake will be worth a lot.
Yeah. When you think about a media entrepreneur who's trying to make the jump from, solo, like some of these newsletters are selling for like $20 million, right? But somebody wants to go from solo to an organization. They want to go from like, the genius with 1,000 helpers to like, no, an actual media organization. Given what's going on in the space these days, what advice would you have there?
Don't don't do it. I'll give you a real world situation. When I was at Fox, we bought MySpace, and MySpace was a division of a company that was run by just an incredible executive entrepreneur, and I think he was very much infatuated with the idea of being at News Corp and being an executive at News Corp, and being in the sphere of Rupert and Peter Chernin and the executives that ran those big fancy divisions. And I remember talking to him saying, like, back to our earlier point, I said to him, like, what you do is so much harder than what we do. but you won't survive here. Like you're an entrepreneur, and this isn't purely about being an entrepreneur. It's about navigating, the rough waters and politics, and that is everything that you're not. And like, why even bother? You're so good at what you do. And he, of course, didn't stay and went on to just incredible success in three or four other businesses because that's what he does. And so if you're an entrepreneur and you started a newsletter about fishing, and it sold for $20 million, and it sold to Field and Stream. I can't think of a better idea. But Field and Stream is not a giant company. Although, interestingly, it was just bought by Morgan Wallen and Eric Church, which I thought was really smart, right? Um, but let's say it was part of Condé Nast, and all of a sudden you go from being a single writer on a newsletter to going to play politics at Condé Nast. It's no fun. Go be an entrepreneur. You may make more money, but that won't last long, right? It's very different, and I think the it, it's. I always used to say this. I would tell you that I'm very entrepreneurial as an executive, but I am not an entrepreneur. I can't start a company from scratch. I have no idea how to do that. But I can be entrepreneurial and navigate the waters of a big company. And that's an art and it's a skill. And as is being an entrepreneur, and just be good at what you're good at. The unfortunate thing is we always think the grass is greener on the other side of whatever.
Yeah.
And I don't know. Maybe I'm just not good at it. I sort of am what I am, and I always tell people to sit in who they are and be good at it. Be a
Yeah.
great home run hitter or be a great singles hitter. P. Rose had 4,000 plus hits. He hit a lot of singles. He didn't hit a lot of home runs.
Yeah. You know, I'm interested in your thoughts. Like, first, we got to give a shout out to our mutual friend, Michelle Gillette, put us together
Yep.
here.
Yes,
We're excited that she's over with us at Greystoke Network.
she's fantastic.
And like, let's talk about podcasting for a minute. We had a previous conversation about podcasts. Michelle's got a podcast. I've got a podcast. Hopefully you're going to have a podcast someday, right? When you think about the medium of podcasting, what do you think? Like, why has it become so successful? It's just people talking.
Well, I think because it's the purest form of communication without any real inhibitors. I'll give you a great example. You have me on, we can talk about anything you want. It doesn't have to fit. I only have 4 minutes to have this guest on. We could go 20 minutes or we could go 2 hours. It doesn't matter. The most success, Joe Rogan, who arguably the most successful person, he'll have the Undertaker on one day, and then he'll have a neurophysicist who, does whatever neurophysicists do. And he can talk for hours with either one of them. It doesn't have to conform. And I think certainly the media business has always conformed to something. You have to fit a certain thing. And the beauty of podcasting is that it doesn't have to. We did a deal when I was at Arena Group with Bill Maher. Bill Maher, genius comedian, talk show host, Real Time has been on HBO for 25 plus years. And it fits it fits a format. They have a certain type of guest on. It has different blocks in the show. It's an hour long. It runs every Friday night. They replay it and stream it and whatever. And it's incredibly successful. And he decided, along with Chris Case, who's a terrific writer and producer, to start a podcast called Club Random. And Bill has literally a club on his property, and he calls it Club Random. And it was good, and it was really meant for him to be able to do whatever he wants beyond Real Time, which is regimented, and there's an expectation from the audience. But I went to a few of them. I saw him have RFK Jr. on, and it went 2 hours. All the way to the other side of the spectrum, we had John Cougar Mellencamp, when I was a kid, and John Mellencamp on, and that went a completely different direction. And, one was an hour and 20 minutes, one was 2 hours. Then he had Lance Armstrong on, and that was 2 hours. And you could see, and it was free flowing, and Bill was having a drink, and the guests were having a drink. And and it's very loose, and you can, as a consumer listening, there are parts that are interesting and parts that aren't that interesting. And I can fast forward through them or not or whatever. But it was unpredictable instead of predictable, and they both work. But I think if you're yourself or Bill or Joe Rogan and you're curious, that you can do almost anything. And so podcasting works. And by the way, podcasting is a derivative of talk radio, right? And talk shows. And again, talk shows are regimented with very clear time constraints. And you and I, people may not be interested in what we're talking about, and they can leave. But there's how many times have you watched something and go, oh, I'd really like to hear more about that. But because they only had 4 minutes, right? Which is interesting to say that podcasting is successful, because what's our generation become? Completely ADD addicted, right? Give me 60 seconds and I'm done. I grew up New York City listening to 1010 Wins. You give us 22 minutes, we'll give you the world. I knew exactly what to expect in 22 minutes, and wet traffic and weather at 10 and 20. And you knew exactly when everything was. Now, all we have is 30, 60 seconds on TikTok to get everything we need. And so maybe it's a relief that you could sit here and listen to us for 30 or 40 or 50 minutes. I don't know.
Yeah. And I mean, certainly like TikTok clips from podcasts are great, movie trailers for the podcast. You're like, oh, that was a great clip. I want to hear the rest of that episode, right?
Yeah.
It's very validating for you here to say that, because I do look at other shows. I had a guy on early on, he runs the CTO podcast, and he only has chief technology officers, and he had CTO of NASA and all these different ones. And he had like such a clear, narrow thing. He grew faster than me, and he had, more success from a podcast perspective than I did. And it was predictable, and it was this one thing. And if you weren't into CTOs, you didn't care at all. But if you were into CTOs, is like the number one show, right?
Yeah.
And like, there's been so many times I'm like, why did I do a variety show? Maybe I should have just pretended I was only interested in one thing, and then, but as time has gone on and we're closing in on 1,000 episodes now, I wouldn't give it up at all. Like it's almost like, and especially now that we do these dinner parties where we get like these people from the far ends of the solar system meet each other, right? AI CEOs and a movie star and a billionaire investor, and like people who don't normally run into each other. It's like, the diverse set of folks has actually become the advantage, because like when people get invited to my party, like we send out this like wash guest list. Like we don't say names, but we say, hey, CEO of production company for A++ movie star, but we don't tell you who it is, right? And it's like, people don't have a bunch of other invites to that party. Like there's no second version of this. They can't just like skip it and go next Friday, right?
Right.
And like, I think about the people who become clients or investors who, they were actually fascinated with these other people at the party or other people on my podcast, which actually started the conversation. And like, it's like my status went up just because I was hanging around with these folks that they thought were cool, right? And like, I had this woman from BlackRock on who manages 6 trillion in ETFs for BlackRock. And, but she's a drama major, and she definitely wanted to talk about the stories of like the movie producers and people who've been on the show, and it's been like a slower route. Like I didn't have the skyrocketing success, but like now that I've got this thing, and I get emails from people that are like, Jess, I love the show. I mean, I do skip all the special ops guys. That's not my thing, but I love the rest of your episodes. And I'm like, great, skip those ones,
Well, we all want to be something else, right? Even, what is it? Athletes want to be rock stars, rock stars want to be movie stars, and movie stars want to be rock stars too, right? Like, so I think it's awesome that, again, the commonality, I think, in a lot of successful people is they want to keep learning and learning from other people. And I've seen that a lot. We have a perception of other people and what they are. Again, I probably the most down to earth, probably one of the most interesting people I've ever met in my life was Robert Redford. And we brought him, when I was at Yahoo, we brought him to Cannes Lion Festival, which is the ad festival in France every year where all the advertisers go to mingle and hopefully do deals for the coming year. And we brought Redford because we thought he was the epitome of storytelling, and we were trying to reposition Yahoo a bit as a media asset and a storytelling asset. And Redford told me a story. I mean, he was the most successful um, movie star of the '80s, certainly, and always sort of knew the joke. He knew that it wasn't going to last, and he knew that he had to get outside of Hollywood, and he used his fame to build Sundance, and Sundance became the platform for obviously for independent filmmakers, and it was a way for him to create longevity in a career that doesn't have longevity. Right, movie stars are very rare that they last more than a short period of time. But the thing that struck me the most about him, and he told this story. I interviewed him on the stage of the Palais in front of thousands of people, and we had met the night before, and he told me the story, and I said, you have to tell that story because it's instructive for the man you are, the man you've become, why you did Sundance, etc. It was, you never forget where you came from. And he told a story that when he was 20 or 21 years old, he was trying to be an actor, and he didn't really know what he wanted to be. He was a failed athlete, and he had been backpacking through Europe and ended up in Cannes, and it was during the time of the Cannes Film Festival. And he said, I was literally sitting on the beach. I was going to sleep under the dock because I had no money. And he said, I looked up at the Hotel Carlton, and there were people out on the balconies in black tie and fancy dresses and a lot of chatter and music and noise. And I looked up at that and I was like, oh my God, there's the epitome one day. He goes, and I'll get it wrong because it was a decade ago. He goes, 5 or 7 years later, I'm the guy on the balcony looking down at the beach. And I looked down at the beach at the dock and remembered that that was me. And so it always kept me humble in the sense that, I knew where I came from. I knew how fleeting it was. And it was one of the reasons why I started Sundance, because I didn't want this all to be for naught. And so again, it goes to, are you curious? Are you humble enough? And can you give back? And so, as you're going through your journey here, you're already doing it. You're giving back through charitable organizations. You're giving back through learning, right? You're teaching others even in this, and this is fun for you, right? It's not just a business. You're learning yourself. And so that to me is a lesson for anybody who's listening here. And it's something you try to tell people who you work with that you and I talked before, but I joke, everybody wants, I want to be a CEO. Why? Why do you want to be a CEO? Do you even know what that means? It's not nearly as fun as doing, the line work. It may pay better, but it certainly isn't as fun, right? It's like you solve problems all day long. It's tough.
Yeah. That's such a great story. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Um, I live in the town next to Sundance, and so we see him here sometimes. And
He's amazing. He's 80. I
yeah,
think he's 88 now. He's an amazing, amazing man. There are times in life you meet people who change your life, and seeing that and experiencing it for a bit. Like I said at the opening of the show, I grew up in a little town in Jersey outside of New York City, but it could have been Nebraska. I mean, literally, we had 14,000 people in my town. And if you had told me I would have had the experiences I've had, good and bad, by the way, life is not a straight line. I would have, signed up for it in a second. I would have thought you were crazy. So I wake up every day and, I live in Los Angeles, and, most of the time the weather's pretty good and you got good views and it's whatever. I'm grateful every day that even through the rough times, I'm blessed that I was able to have the career that I've had, meet the people that I've met, and learn something from just about it, and continue to learn. You got to stay curious.
yeah, no kidding. Um, let's talk about being a CEO though. Um, it's something that so many people are trying to do, and certainly at the level of organizations you've been the CEO, so few ever reach that. What do you think is different about you? What do you think you've done differently that others haven't done?
I'm able to take a punch. Um, I don't know. I would say it took me a while to figure it out. I never got an MBA. I'd say I got my MBA early in my career. I worked in boxing. I'd say I got my MBA in boxing, like literally watching how that business was run. Um, and I had some great people that I could, learn from through osmosis or being, Murdoch and Chernin and um, even entrepreneurs like Michael Farrow and Todd Bowley, who I worked with for a bit. You just try to learn from them. I'd say I was marginally successful. I think I had a good run. Still am running, trying to put it all together. I think I listen pretty well. I learned that from a boss of mine when I was younger. I'd say I talk too much, and you learn more from listening than you do from talking. And so, the I'd say Peter Chernin was probably the best at it of anyone I've ever seen. That you'd watch him listening to people. And Murdoch too had a thing about him that he wouldn't always talk. And when there's space in a conversation, Jess, you tend to fill it. And if you're comfortable not to fill it, people just keep talking and telling you more and more and more and more. So I guess I listen. I'd say the secret of being somewhat successful is hiring the right people. Knowing, feeling comfortable in who you are and what you do, and empowering others to do it. I always, for better or for worse, my general thesis about being a CEO is it's really tough. There are four things that end up being really important in life when you're running a company, and that's job, family, your kids, your spouse, and your health. And I tell everybody who asks me about it, I say, those are the four things that at least are important to most people I know. And if you're going to be the CEO of a real business, like you can only pick two of them, and number one better be your job. And if it's not, then you shouldn't be a CEO, which means that, family, spouse or partner and health, you can only pick one of those. And that's kind of a sad commentary on what it means to be a CEO. But you have to make that sacrifice and commitment, and it unfortunately ends a lot of marriages and creates a lot of bridge building between, family and the person, and certainly your health suffers, unless you're Superman, like some people I know, and they get up at 4 a.m. and then they're at their desk at 6. And, I don't know how long you can sustain that. That's a hard thing. So, it's not, being a CEO has incredible advantages and from learning to money, but there's also incredible sacrifices. And I've been fortunate to have been around, at least in the media and tech space, some of the most successful CEOs of this generation. And when I had the chance, I would ask all of them the same question, which was, what would you have changed in your life if you could? If you could go back, what would you change? And I'd say almost to a person, they would say, I wish I had more time with my kids. And there were a couple who didn't, but not many. Most of them said, I wish I had more time with my kids because, the time is fleeting. I know we all say that. And I have two. I have one who's in college and one who's going to be in college soon. And, I would try to make those sacrifices. I'd be in Europe and fly home to a game and then fly back to New York the next day, just because I didn't want to miss the game. And and you get joy out of that too as a parent. So, it's hard. It's hard to be a CEO for sure. Not to
Yeah.
mention all the other stuff that comes, certainly a CEO of a media business, you are put in a firing squad every day, especially now.
um, you talked about this idea of having a great team. Can you tell us a story of finding and hiring somebody that was just incredible?
I've been really lucky. I've had a couple of right hand people along the way, and I uh, I met I met one I just was interviewing for a position. Well, that's not true. I'll tell you about three. When I got to Fox, I interviewed everybody who was part of this company. It was called News Digital Media. And we ended up firing most of the people because the internet world had sort of imploded in 2000 and we had to get rid of a bunch of people. But I met one young, I think he was a production designer at the time, which I don't even know what that means. Like maybe created designs on web pages. And we were together for almost 7 years and I promoted him 6 times. And he went on to be as successful as you could be in this business without being a CEO. And he didn't want to be a CEO. He knew that he wanted to be what he wanted to be. I'm not using names because I don't want to embarrass them. He was my guy every day. Like he was everything I wasn't, and he was my guy. Right. And then towards the end of my run at Fox, I met a woman who was running. I hired to run a division, but she was everything that I wasn't. And as I moved, she came with me to a couple of jobs, and was self-made, Harvard educated, Disney, Strat, like just everything that I'm not. And you've got to put people around you who fill in the holes that you have, right? And I got plenty of holes. And then at my last job, I had a couple of folks. My COO, Andrew Kraft, was everything that I wasn't, and was incredibly valuable to the company and to me. And I couldn't have done it without him. And I had a couple other folks, Rob Barrett and some folks in different groups that just made it all work. You cannot be successful without those people around you. And I've been really lucky to have a whole bunch. And I've had a bunch of people who've come with me from job to job, which, as I look back on my career and you go, well, what are you most proud of? I'd say that I was able to attract good people and they wanted to stay with me, which I don't know, that's a hard thing.
You know, it, it makes me want to ask, like, there's so many people that have a great resume and that interview well. And then there's people who perform well consistently for years to come. Do you have any hints on how to separate the two?
Oh, I've met a lot of bad hires too. Um, I think that, I'd say this, pretty quickly when you hire, certainly on a senior level. On a non-senior level, the stars rise really quickly. You see that. On the senior level, I met a lot of people who interview really well and have a great resume. And when you do the tough thing when you do checks on them, when you do background checks and talk to references, nobody ever gives a reference that's going to give a bad reference, right? So, when you hire and recruiters who I've worked with over and over again, they want you to hire the person too because they want to get paid their fee. So you sort of have to go around them. And today, with the internet and we can go back and check almost anything, you could find something bad on almost anybody, right? So you ultimately have to make a decision based on your own feeling and your gut instinct on people. Then I said I've been wrong more than I've been right, probably in terms of people I've hired. But if you hire hundreds of thousands of people, that's probably going to be true. Um, but the ones I don't, I would say I haven't been wrong often on the ones that I entrusted with the most. And so like I'm willing to, at least bet on myself when I hire the right people. And again, what we're doing here is not life and death. We're not operating on people's brains. So like I expect everybody, including myself, to make a lot of mistakes.
Yeah, it's a great attitude. Um, I know we're about out of time. If people want to connect with you online, is LinkedIn good, or where are the best
Yeah,
places to find out about you?
LinkedIn is fine. I'm not a big, I don't post a whole lot on social media. I think LinkedIn is great. It's a great way, to find people, professionally. And even now it's becoming more and more of a news source and personally. So yeah, I'm on it and I'm thankful for you to you for having me on. It's great to be able to talk about some stuff, and congrats on all your success. This is fantastic.
I really love the conversation. I appreciate all the things you shared. What do you want to leave people with today?
Oh gosh, we're I'd say embrace change. That's the thing that's kept me going all these years. I just love it. This is the opportunities for people today. I've been really focused on the creator economy and the creator space over the last 2 years. The opportunity for anyone to do anything and communicate their message and make a living and invent stuff and be a part of things has never been greater. It is so invigorating to watch. And I think that if you embrace that, you can find your calling. Right? Did you know 10 years, 20 years ago, you're going to do 1,000 podcasts? Probably not.
No, it's interesting what an advantage it can be for founders and CEOs. Like you see so many more professional and especially leaders who are people who have big ideas being, well, whether they're writing on LinkedIn, having their own podcast, having a YouTube channel, something like this, right?
Yeah.
And it's like all of a sudden now they have their own outlet. You talk about disintermediated, right? They get the message directly out instead of through a filter. And it's fascinating to see some of the folks who really embrace that and how it ends up raising their status, which ends up raising the company status. And it's, was not on the traditional marketing budget of like, have the CEO put out a lot of unfiltered content.
Yeah, well, because it doesn't conform, right? We were taught in my upbringing in this industry, we were taught don't ever go outside the box, right? And even at Arena, I'd say in my 4 or 5 years there, I did 3 or 4 interviews, 5 interviews max. Like I was just so heads down on running the business, and it was probably a mistake. We probably should have been more out there. We were doing a lot of great things. I wanted others to do it. I didn't really want to do it, but now you're right. Like I haven't. This may be the first podcast I've ever done, right? And I
I
love
feel
to
I
talk.
feel
By the way,
honored.
I love to talk. I did. You asked me, oh, highlight of your career. I was interviewing Robert Redford. I interviewed Tom Hanks at CES. Like I want to be a talk show host. That would be fun.
It is. Well, again, appreciate you doing this.
Thank you, Jess. Thanks for having me on.
You bet. Okay, bye everyone.